Welcome to our deep dive into Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. This book is like a fascinating blend of memoir and inspiration, and we're here to kind of uncover its wisdom and see how it applies to your own creative journey.
Yeah, it's really like a roadmap, I think, for anyone who feels that creative spark, but maybe hasn't fully embraced it yet. Gilbert weaves in her personal stories, like her encounter with a bull elk that inspired a short story. And then she also gives us insights on everything from conquering fear to trusting the creative process.
Yeah, right off the bat, Gilbert introduces this idea that fear is a natural part of the creative process, but we don't have to let it control us. And she uses the example of Jack Gilbert, the poet, who really lived a life dedicated to his art. What stands out to you about his story?
Well, I think Jack Gilbert really embodies this idea of courage. He wasn't chasing fame or fortune. He was really driven by this need to bring forth the treasures that were buried within him. It's a really powerful message for anyone who's hesitated to pursue their creative passions because of fear.
It makes you think about what we might be holding back, those hidden treasures, as she calls them, that we're too afraid to share with the world. And Gilbert's definition of creative living is broader than just being an artist, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
She talks about her friend Susan, who took up figure skating at 40, just for the pure joy of it.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that creative living can be anything that brings you alive. Anything that feeds your curiosity and kind of pushes you beyond your comfort zone.
One of the most intriguing concepts in Big Magic is this idea of creative contracts. Gilbert suggests that we can choose the kind of agreement we make with our creative work. What does she mean by that?
Well, think of it like this. You can approach creativity from a place of suffering, believing that it has to be a constant struggle. Or you can choose a more joyful, collaborative approach. Gilbert calls the former the contract of suffering. And she really encourages us to move towards a more cooperative and joyful way of creating.
And this ties into her belief that ideas are living entities, almost like spirits seeking collaborators in the human world. And she shares a story about a lost novel that she had to set aside. Years later, her friend Ann Patchett suddenly had a strikingly similar idea for a novel.
It's a fascinating story, and it raises so many questions about the nature of inspiration. Gilbert believes that this idea, which was originally hers, somehow transferred to Patchett and found the right person at the right time to bring it to life.
It's almost spooky, isn't it? Like ideas have their own energy and can move between people. Gilbert even shares anecdotes from readers who claim she wrote their life stories.
Yeah, it really challenges us to think about the interconnectedness of our creative energy, how our stories and ideas might be intertwined in ways we don't fully grasp. It's a reminder that we might be tapping into something larger than ourselves when we create.
And this leads us to another important point, permission. Gilbert emphasizes that no one needs permission to live a creative life. You don't need a degree or anyone's approval to make your work. It's about reclaiming that inherent right to express yourself.
Right? She talks about her parents who weren't artists in the traditional sense, but they lived creatively in their own ways. Her dad was an engineer who became a farmer and a beekeeper, and her mom could build and sew anything. It's a reminder that creativity can manifest in countless forms, and it's available to everyone, regardless of background or training.
She even suggests that we view ourselves as children of the universe with a right to our own unique voice and vision. It's a beautiful way of reframing our relationship with creativity, isn't it? Like, it's not about being arrogant or entitled. It's about recognizing that we are all inherently worthy of creating.
Exactly. It's about pushing back against those limiting beliefs that tell us we're not good enough, or that art isn't a real pursuit. Gilbert is giving us permission to claim our space in the world as creative beings.
She also talks about the importance of finding your tribe, those people who understand and support your creative journey. And she shares her experience with the Fat Kids, a writing workshop she formed with friends, and how that sense of community helped them all grow.
Yeah, community can be such a powerful antidote to the isolation that many creatives experience. It's about creating a safe space to explore and experiment and receive feedback without judgment. It's about knowing you're not alone on this journey.
And this might surprise you, Gilbert didn't get an MFA in writing.
Oh, really?
She learned her craft by working odd jobs, traveling, observing people, and of course, writing.
It's refreshing to hear, especially for those who may feel like they need formal credentials to be considered legitimate artists. Gilbert's path reminds us that there are many ways to hone your skills and find your voice. It's about being resourceful and dedicated and trust in the process.
She even cautions against going into debt for an arts education. She's not against it entirely, but she wants people to be aware of the burden that debt can place on a creative life.
It's a practical consideration that's often overlooked.
Yeah.
Financial stress can stifle creativity, so it's important to find ways to sustain yourself without sacrificing your creative freedom.
Now, once you've created something, there's the whole issue of dealing with criticism. How does Gilbert suggest we navigate that often tricky terrain?
She encourages us to let go of the need for everyone to understand or approve of our work. She even tells the story about how a reader completely misinterpreted Eat, Pray, Love and found a message that wasn't even there. It highlights that once we release our work into the world, it takes on a life of its own.
It's like we can't control how others will interpret it. And that's okay. It's a valuable lesson in detachment, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. She emphasizes that people's judgments are none of our business. It's not about what they call us, but what we answer to.
So it's about staying true to our own vision and purpose, regardless of external noise or opinions. Gilbert then tackles this idea of perfectionism and how it can sabotage our creative flow. What's her take on that?
She encourages us to embrace imperfection and become what she calls a disciplined half-ass. It's about letting go of that paralyzing pursuit of perfection and focusing on completion. Showing up consistently and doing the work even when it feels messy is key.
She talks about her first novel, which she describes as stupendously imperfect, but finishing it taught her valuable lessons about persistence and getting the work done. It's about progress, not perfection, right?
Exactly. We learn and evolve through the act of creating, even if the final product isn't flawless. Done is better than perfect is a mantra worth embracing.
And Gilbert challenges this whole myth of the portrait artist, this idea that you have to suffer to create meaningful work. And that's a perspective that can be really damaging, especially for young artists.
It is fascinating how she deconstructs that romanticized notion and shows how it can hinder our creative flow and lead to burnout.
She asks aspiring writers if they believe writing loves them back, and they often look at her in disbelief. They see it as a tormentor.
It speaks to that pervasive cultural narrative around creativity, that it has to be painful and fraught with struggle. Gilbert encourages a more joyful and collaborative relationship with your work.
And she offers this wonderful concept of trickster trust. Can you explain what she means by that?
Yeah, it's about approaching creativity with a sense of playfulness and trust to the universe. The trickster sees the creative process as a game to be played, a dance to be danced, embracing the unexpected and trusting that things will unfold as they should.
It's a refreshing contrast to the martyr mindset, which sees the system as rigged and focuses on suffering and external validation.
Instead of fighting against the current, the trickster surfs the waves, knowing that even the most challenging experiences can be transformed into creative fuel.
And speaking of fuel, Gilbert highlights the importance of curiosity as a driving force in creative living. It's a more accessible entry point than passion, which can sometimes feel elusive or overwhelming.
Right. Curiosity invites us to ask questions that explore and follow the threads that spark our interest. She shares her journey writing The Signature of All Things, a novel that began with her simple curiosity about gardening.
She started by planting things in her backyard, and that led her down this rabbit hole of research, tracing the origins of different plants across continents and through time. It's amazing how a simple curiosity can blossom into a full-blown passion.
It speaks to the power of following those initial sparks of interest, even if they seem small or insignificant at first. They can lead us to unexpected creative breakthroughs.
And once you've found that spark persistence is key, Gilbert emphasizes the importance of showing up for your work even when you don't feel inspired.
She believes that inspiration often follows action. It's about creating the conditions for creativity to flourish by consistently engaging with your craft.
Okay, get this. Gilbert tells this hilarious story about a drunken escapade with a friend in Wyoming. It involves an elk calling tape and a very large elk.
Oh, wow.
She actually turned that encounter into a short story called Elk Talk, which she submitted to various literary magazines. It was rejected at first, but years later, when she was already a published author, that same story was accepted by the very first magazine she'd sent it to.
What a testament to the power of persistence and believing in your work. It's also a reminder that success often takes time, and that rejections are not failures, just part of the journey.
And then there's the importance of trusting your instincts and having the courage to be different. She shares this great anecdote about her friend who went to a masquerade ball in France, dressed as a lobster, surrounded by European royalty in elaborate costumes.
Oh my God.
He could have run away in shame, but instead he embraced the absurdity of the situation and ended up dancing with the Queen of Belgium.
I love that.
It's a beautiful reminder that sometimes our perceived flaws or quirks are actually our strengths.
It's about owning who you are and trusting that it will resonate with the right people.
And when those inner critics start to creep in, Gilbert encourages us to manage our egos, those voices that can sabotage our creative flow.
She reminds us that we're not just egos, we're also souls. And our souls crave wonder and connection. It's about tapping into that deeper source of inspiration, one that's not driven by fear or the need for external validation.
So how do we tap into that deeper source of inspiration, that sense of wonder that fuels our creative spirit? What are some practical ways to cultivate that connection?
Well, Gilbert suggests finding ways to access wonder in our daily lives. It could be through spending time in nature or immersing yourself in art or music, or even just paying attention to the small, beautiful details that often go unnoticed.
It's about cultivating a sense of awe and appreciation for the world around us, isn't it? That sense of wonder can open us up to new possibilities and spark creative ideas.
Precisely. And Gilbert also delves into how different cultures approach creativity. She shares a story from her Balinese medicine man friend, Kitit Lyre, about the controversy that erupted when Balinese dancers started performing their sacred temple dances at tourist resorts.
I remember that story. Yeah, it sparked a lot of debate about what's considered sacred or profane when it comes to art. Some Westerners saw it as sacrilege, a desecration of holy rituals, while the Balinese had a more pragmatic view.
It's a fascinating example of how cultural norms and beliefs can shape our understanding of creativity. The Balinese saw it as a way to share their culture and generate income and adapt to the changing times.
It challenges us to question our own assumptions about art and creativity, doesn't it? To consider different perspectives and to recognize that there isn't always a clear-cut distinction between what's sacred and what's not.
It highlights the paradoxical nature of art. Something can be deeply meaningful and also be a source of entertainment or even commerce.
Gilbert ultimately concludes that creativity is both sacred and not sacred. It's a concept that can be hard to wrap your head around, but it speaks to that inherent mystery and complexity of the creative process.
It's about holding those seemingly contradictory ideas in our minds and hearts without needing to resolve the tension. It's about embracing the unknown, the unpredictable nature of creative expression.
And one of the most powerful stories in Big Magic is about Gilbert's uncle Nick, who attended a talk by the novelist Richard Ford. He was an aspiring writer who had faced years of rejection and was desperate for advice.
And Ford's response was quite surprising. He told the man to quit writing.
I know, but there's more to the story, right? Ford wasn't being cruel. He sensed that writing had become a source of pain and frustration for this man, that it was no longer bringing him joy.
Exactly. He encouraged him to step away and find something that truly lit him up, something that brought him a sense of fulfillment.
But then he added this caveat. If after some time away from writing, he found that nothing else could fill that void, that he simply had to write, then he would have no choice but to persevere.
It speaks to the deep-seated nature of a creative calling. Sometimes we need to explore other avenues to step away from what we think we should be doing to truly understand the depth of our commitment to our craft.
It's a reminder that creativity isn't always about forcing things. Sometimes it's about listening to that inner voice, that deep knowing that guides us towards what we're meant to create.
And sometimes it's about having the courage to walk away from what's no longer serving us to make space for new possibilities to emerge.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Big Magic, what are some key takeaways that you think will resonate with our listeners? What are some of the most valuable insights that Gilbert offers?
Well, I think one of the most powerful messages is about embracing our creative potential with courage and curiosity. It's about releasing the pressure to be perfect and remembering that we are all inherently creative beings.
She gives us permission to play, to experiment, and to trust the process, even when it feels messy or uncertain.
And she reminds us that we don't need anyone's approval to create. Our unique voice and vision matter, and the world needs our creative gifts.
She also encourages us to cultivate a sense of playful trust, to approach creativity as an adventure, a dance, a game to be played.
And to find our tribe, those people who support and encourage our creative journey. Even in solitude, we are not alone. We are connected to a vast web of creative energy, and inspiration can come from the most unexpected sources.
Big Magic is filled with so many inspiring stories and practical tips. I'm curious what resonated with you the most on a personal level. Was there a particular concept or anecdote that stood out?
For me, it was the idea of creative contracts. It really shifted my perspective on how I approach my own work. I realized that I had unconsciously adopted a contract of suffering, believing that creativity had to be a struggle. But Gilbert helped me see that it can be a source of joy, a collaborative dance with the universe.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's a reminder that we have a choice in how we approach creativity. We can choose to see it as a burden or as a gift.
And choosing joy doesn't mean that the work will always be easy or that we won't face challenges. But it means approaching those challenges with a different mindset, with a sense of playfulness and trust in the process.
It's about reframing our relationship with creativity, seeing it as a source of nourishment and fulfillment rather than a source of stress and self-doubt.
Exactly. And I think ultimately that's what Big Magic is all about. It's about rediscovering the joy and wonder of creating and sharing our gifts with the world.
So if you're feeling stuck or uninspired or just need a little boost of creative energy, I highly recommend checking out Big Magic. It's a book that will stay with you long after you've finished reading it.
And remember, you have permission to create. So go out there and make some magic.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Big Magic. Until next time, keep creating. It sounds like Big Magic has given you like a whole new perspective on your own creative journey. What about you? What resonated most with you from the book?
For me, it was that reminder to be curious. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the pressure to produce and to be successful that we forget that simple joy of exploring. And Gilbert's story about how her curiosity about gardening led to her writing The Signature of All Things really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, it's so easy to lose sight of that childlike wonder, isn't it? That sense of excitement and possibility that comes with discovering something new.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most important messages in Big Magic, to reclaim that sense of wonder, to approach creativity with a sense of playfulness and curiosity, and to trust that the journey itself is the reward.
It's about letting go of the outcome and focusing on the process, allowing yourself to be surprised and delighted by what emerges along the way.
And it's about recognizing that creativity is not a solitary pursuit. We're all connected.
Oh.
We can draw inspiration from each other, from the world around us, from the unseen forces that guide and support us.
So if you could distill Big Magic down to one essential message, what would it be? What's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this deep dive?
I think it'd be this: you have permission to create. You don't need anyone's approval. You don't need a degree. You don't need to suffer. Just create. Follow your curiosity. Trust your instincts and let the magic unfold.
That's a beautiful message. And I think it's a message that we all need to hear, especially in a world that often tells us to play it safe, to follow the rules, to fit in.
Gilbert reminds us that creativity is about breaking free from those limitations, about embracing our uniqueness and sharing our gifts with the world.
So what's next for you on your creative journey? What are you curious about exploring now?
Well, inspired by Gilbert's emphasis on curiosity, I've actually started taking pottery classes. It's something I've always been interested in, but I never really gave myself permission to try it.
That's fantastic. It's a reminder that it's never too late to explore new creative avenues.
Exactly. And who knows where this new path will lead? I'm excited to see what unfolds.
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The journey is the destination. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Big Magic, we want to leave you with a thought inspired by the book. If you were to create a gibberish dance for your own creative work, what would it look like? What unexpected movements and expressions would it involve? What would it feel like to move through your creative process with that same sense of freedom and playfulness? We encourage you to explore that question, to let your imagination run wild, and to embrace the magic that awaits you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep creating.